I got a virus, and 2 weeks later, I was incredibly ill. I had to stop working the middle of that day. I could not go back. Ended up completely disabled and ultimately was diagnosed with POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I was told I likely had EDS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it was a genetic problem, and there really was nothing they could do. And I thought, I'm not buying this. I got a virus and then I went down.
Mhm.
Although I worked with the experts for years, I was in clinical trials, et cetera. I felt like the virus changed something. And if we could figure that out, maybe I could treat it and go back to the health I had before I got this virus. And then my kids got sick and my son was completely disabled. He missed over 3 years of school. And with no answers from anyone, I was pushed into, well, let's see what we can figure out.
Mhm.
Might be in position to get answers. And that's how my journey began in the
Mhm.
nervous system. Yeah.
Hello, Diana. Welcome to the Awakened Heart podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nancy. It's an honor to be here.
Dr. Diana, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As I was reading through your work, what stood out to me wasn't just the research. It was the fact that this all came from your own experience, navigating something that wasn't really explained or treated. And I think that's something that so many people are quietly dealing with right now, feeling off in their body, not getting clear answers, and trying to piece things together on their own. And you've taken that journey and turned it into actual solutions, not just for people dealing with POTS, but really anyone who wants to understand their nervous system, inflammation, and how to stay sharp and resilient as they age. So I'd love to start there. What really pulled you into this work on a deeper level?
Nancy, I wish I could say I was just always interested in this field. I'm an optometrist by education and was very happy with optometry, but I got sick. I got a virus, and 2 weeks later, I was incredibly ill. I had to stop working the middle of that day. I could not go back. Ended up completely disabled and ultimately was diagnosed with POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I was told I likely had EDS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it was a genetic problem, and there really was nothing they could do. And I thought, I'm not buying this. I got a virus and then I went down.
Mhm.
Although I worked with the experts for years, I was in clinical trials, et cetera. I felt like the virus changed something. And if we could figure that out, maybe I could treat it and go back to the health I had before I got this virus. And then my kids got sick and my son was completely disabled. He missed over 3 years of school. And with no answers from anyone, I was pushed into, well, let's see what we can figure out.
Mhm.
Might be in position to get answers. And that's how my journey began in the
Mhm.
nervous system.
Yeah, so that there was that moment where you realized, I'm going to have to figure this out myself. Am I going to? Because I'm not getting the answers for how I'm feeling. And just, it's crazy how just a virus can just knock you down and then create all these other symptoms that nobody was diagnosing you properly about. It's got to have been so frustrating. So you took us back to when your health started shifting. What were you experiencing and what exactly wasn't adding up for you?
Yes, so many things. The symptoms continued to shift and change over time. I had a spreadsheet of symptoms, and when I go to a doctor, I would pull it up and I'd change it, because it was evolving over time. The virus, I will say, we all got the same virus. We went on this trip. Everybody else recovered. So I can't exactly blame the virus, right? It
Mhm.
was my body's response to it. But the first thing I noticed was that I would get really shaky. If I stood up, my heart would start racing. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't take a breath. I got hit with waves that felt like waves of adrenaline, like anxiety came with it. I would get hot in a wave. My digestion started to be affected. I developed constipation that went episodically with diarrhea, but it went completely into gastroparesis where it just wouldn't move at all. I felt like I couldn't control my body anymore. I couldn't control my thoughts. I couldn't control how anything was working. Blood pressure was weird. My position would change, my heart rate and blood pressure. And it seemed like every system of the body was affected. And I went to literally, I'm not exaggerating, Nancy, probably 50 doctors over the years. Ended up in a research hospital where they were doing clinical trials. I worked with them for 3 years. But really, what shifted it was the day I was just getting worse every year. And I finally talked to the head researcher, and I thought, these are the smartest people. They have some idea what's happening. And I said, what do you think? What would be your guess? Throw me about, what are we dealing with here? And he said, well, it's our belief that POTS patients are perfectly normal. They're just more aware of their own bodies. Thought, you have got to be kidding me. I was disabled. My son was disabled. His growth had stopped. He developed severe osteoporosis. He broke his arm, Nancy, just putting on his coat.
Oh my gosh.
Another arm throwing a ball, and nobody was helping us, and they just thought we were just more aware of our body. I thought that was incredible.
Mhm.
So I was, gosh, around 50 years old at that time. I was a successful doctor, and was completely disabled. Why weren't they thinking deeper? Very frustrating. But that's when I set up Genetic Disease Investigators, a corporation to start to house some of the research. So I don't know if I'll get answers, but we're going to give it everything we got.
Mhm.
So over a decade or so of working on it.
So your son, he had the same virus and he got POTS as well. Or
No,
no? But
he got a series of 3 just regular old viruses. Everyone in his school got the same viruses, and they recovered just fine, but each one just knocked him down further. And the third one, he couldn't get out of bed. And yeah, so again, I kind of shifted to, is there a genetic setup for this? Because we can't blame the virus, right? Other people
no.
recovered just fine. It was more of our body's abnormal response to these
Mhm.
infections. And is that a clue? And had to go that direction instead. And do
Mm.
you know, this story, of course, has a great ending. I'm fine, or helping patients every day with this. My son is fine. My daughter, who is also sick, she wasn't disabled like my son. She was able to still go to school, but still dramatically affected. We are all fine. Okay, there are ways out of this.
Mhm.
Some of that horrible story with that.
You just don't think that a virus, you hear, oh, I got a virus and get sick. I mean, I've been one that always recovers well. I rarely get sick. I get more where I get the edge of it where I'm just tired or lethargic or feeling depressed or something. But
Yeah.
it's just mind blowing to think that a virus, a little bug, could knock someone down like that. But like you said, it's something in the genetics that you're exploring that could have an abnormal response to these viruses, whereas other people might get better than others. It's just like what we experienced over the last couple of years with that major virus that went around and people had different responses to it. So you didn't accept the standard answers and you went deeper and you were seeing things that others were missing.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that you saw that they were just definitely missing? I mean, the one like, oh, I think you just know your body better. Okay, thanks.
I know. I was so horrified by that. I remember that exact day that happened. I thought, well, my comfort zone is in the eyes. I'm an eye doctor. So why don't we look inside of eyes of patients? And the first study genetic disease investigators did was to bring in 35 patients diagnosed with POTS and 35 age-matched normals. And we did every ocular test we could think of on them. And then I was the blinded doctor, meaning I didn't know who was a patient, who was an age matched normal, but I was presented with images in the back of their eyes. And that's the only place in the body you can look directly at blood vessels. You can look directly at the optic nerve, a cranial nerve. And I had no idea what I was looking for. What am I supposed to look for? I looked for any sort of pattern and I started to pick up on some things. And I was correct in figuring out who was a patient and who wasn't almost 90% of the time. So then we took those clues and moved to next steps. Everything I figured out, it took so long to figure out. There were years in between each discovery, but eventually we were able to get to the end of it. Yeah.
Mm.
I started with the eyes. It wasn't a place to end, but it was a good place to start.
Now I've heard about looking into the eyes because there's a lot of Chinese doctors that will look into your eye and diagnose you. Did you use a lot of Eastern technologies and it was all genetics looking at the eye?
Western medicine. Felt like all the doctors were saying, "Well, everything looks fine." I said, "There is no possible way everything could look fine and you can be this sick." You know,
Mhm.
we're not looking in the right places.
Yes.
So I stayed in Western medicine, but I went deeper into it, like looking at the back of the eye. I didn't just use the current criteria we would use as doctors to judge vascular health. I went deeper and found that, okay, they may not meet the criteria of abnormal, but why are the veins larger? Why are the arteries smaller? Why is there propensity to develop arterial plaque formation, even in children? Even in my 9-year-old son, why would he be developing plaque? You know, so I could stay in Western medicine, but just went further into it than anyone had gone before.
So many misunderstood diseases and diagnoses, something like POTS. Why do you think conditions like POTS or vagus nerve dysfunction are still so misunderstood?
Yes. It's these groups we'd say invisible illnesses, which of course they're not invisible. Um, Doctors need to shift how they look for markers
Mhm.
for these, right? But what I ultimately found was the diagnosis of POTS is not a good label. That is not a disease, right? You can't catch POTS from someone. It's a presentation. It is a fast heart rate upon standing, upon being vertical, but it doesn't say why. And in each case, the heart is reacting to something. In each case, you have to figure out what is it reacting to and what other damage is that doing to the body. And that only is the only way to figure out, could we lay out a treatment plan? And then the heart rate normalizes when the underlying problems are figured out. So every case is extraordinarily complex, but there's always a reason for POTS. So I think a lot of the labels we deal with these invisible illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, don't even get me started on some of those. It's unfortunate that they're not objective. I would love to see them based on objective markers, preferably found like in the blood and the genetics, and tie it all together and say it's not the patient's fault. It isn't a weak female, depressed.
Mhm.
It's it's a medical condition. And understanding the propensity for this in some populations, we no longer blame the patient for their own illness.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that you're just saying that about blaming the patient. It's just been going down at night, watching YouTube and watching back when, like 1888 England or the royal family and like inbreeding, and then them losing their children at childbirth, and then any ailments or illness if their child died, it was blamed on the woman. Everything, like the horrible lives these women lived, like they were literally signed over to be property of whatever it is, a business transaction, and how horribly women were treating. So that just reminded me about, oh, it's your fault your child died, or oh, it's your fault they died later in life, or it's witchcraft or something like that. So,
Isn't that
or
crazy? I still
yes,
feel like we're in the dark ages.
yeah, we
I wasn't
are.
aware of that until I got sick. I mean, I'd always been an entrepreneur. I worked for myself. I didn't have to, answer to anybody. So I wasn't really aware that there was that much to
Hmm.
this. Yes. And I thought, okay, I have this condition. Nobody has answers, but I'm a doctor. I was healthy. I'm almost 50. This is a great opportunity for them to get answers. No, no, it wasn't. So then I think I didn't have a chance of getting the help I needed. And I should have, I think, been given that ability. So somebody like a 13-year-old girl or something, she definitely has no chance of getting that.
Hmm.
And the flippancy with these psychiatric diagnoses on these patients
Here
is
is a pill.
flabbergasting to me.
Mm.
I remember one doctor early on, I was just starting to recognize that a lot of my symptoms were autonomic. I took that spreadsheet of symptoms and I went, what are commonalities? There's a lot of autonomic symptoms here. And I went and saw a doctor and he goes, well, let's check your hormones. I said, and it was kind of snarky, but I was so aghast. I said, The last time I looked, hormone changes don't cause autonomic dysfunction. you know, and then the hormones were fine. And of course, they
Mhm,
had the answers. But I was just starting to recognize that the gaslighting, as you mentioned, and
mhm.
the lack of authority by the patients, if they're female, was astounding to me.
And if you don't have a sense of self and
Yes.
sovereignty for yourself and you just follow along what these doctors are telling you, because a lot of them don't know, obviously, you went
Right.
to 50 doctors, you're going to be overly medicated, treating the wrong conditions, harming other parts of your body, thinking that you're to blame, something's wrong with you, and you go into this whole spiral.
I feel very fortunate that I got sick before my kids got sick. I look back on that and I think if all the doctors are saying, well, everything looks good, all you can sense is the anxiety, the depression, these changes in mood. Would I have wondered if they were just going crazy? I don't think so. I like to think that, but I do wonder. But I had gone through it. I knew this was medical. We could just
Mhm.
blow past all that. But I did feel for people who don't have that sense of self, as you described. Eventually, I knew it was medical. I walked away from everything they were trying to do, which included many surgeries. And had I done those surgeries, I probably would have been, hamburger meat ultimately. It was very difficult to walk
Yeah.
away from the top mind
Yes.
in the world on this and go, no, you guys are all wrong. But I knew in my heart they were wrong.
And you just hit the bullseye, is knowing your heart, listening to your heart. And I mean, it's hard a lot of times. It's simple in theory, but it's harder when you've got anxiety and fear and you're
Yeah.
going into that reptilian brain. But you listened to your heart and you knew that wasn't the path for you. And yeah, you would have been like surgeries, like so many other things that you can do. I mean, misdiagnosed so many times. So, yeah, it's really sad because a lot of people are, oh, here's a pill for you, or oh, let's just cut that out instead of, doing some kind of therapy or getting to the root of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it is horrifying. I like to think that, 10 years from now, maybe 20, they'll look back on what happened to POTS patients and recognize that everything they were doing for traditional treatment was making the patients worse. And I anticipate a big apology.
Oh, good.
We're going to get that. But yes, everything that is traditionally done for POTS, like high salt or beta blockers to slow the heart, is either keeping patients sick or making them worse.
Mhm.
And don't even get me started on these surgeries that are recommended. It's horrifying. So yeah, quite the journey. And a little bit of stubbornness helps, but I gave it everything I had with the doctors for years. And it wasn't until that one statement of, you're just more aware of your own body that I knew I had to
Mhm.
go.
Yeah, and hearing that and the recommendations, and I'm pretty healthy. I'm in my mid 50s, and I'm learning now that you get higher cholesterol as you get older, and it's actually your brain is cholesterol, and once you go past menopause, you do have higher cholesterol. So cholesterol's a little higher, and then my potassium was up and stuff. But I do spin class, I work out at the gym, and
Okay.
like I want to put you on statins. I'm like, I am not.
Yeah.
I'm like, I am not taking statins. No, I'm not taking medicine for potassium. I'll change my diet, I'll modify it. But I'm like, nope, I don't want all those side effects from something like that. And I'm generally pretty healthy.
We want to do everything we can to be healthy. One problem I faced, though, and again, I was just kind of put in a good position for this. When I got sick, I was in great shape. I mean, I taught aerobics classes, I was a runner, and nutrition was basically a hobby of mine. So when the doctor said, well, part of treatment, you need to exercise and eat clean. I said, well, that makes no sense at all. I'm not deconditioned. I'm in great physical health and my diet is excellent. So had I not been exercising or staying in shape, had I gotten deconditioned, was eating junk or whatever, then I would have gone, oh, I did this to myself. But again, it was something that I could just push away. That wasn't enough. That wasn't going to do it. I was already in good shape. How would exercise cure this? They were just thinking too shallowly.
Yeah.
I did have a doctor say, because it felt like being flooded again with adrenaline. My heart was racing. My resting heart rate was 123. And the cardiologist said, well, that's an impressive heart rate for rest. And I was sitting on this table. I said, would you make a note? Do I look anxious to you? No. Would you put that in the record? Because I know where you guys are going with this, right? They go to anxiety instead. But one of the doctors said, Dinah, maybe you just need to meditate. And again, kind of blaming the patient, right? And I said, I just got hit by a disabling tsunami. Okay. I will do my teaspoon of help with meditation. If you will help me with this ocean, this tsunami,
Mm.
just hit me. It wasn't a subtle illness, Nancy, where I could just like push through, or I was just tired or something. I could not function. My son could not function. So it was so much more than what the doctors were implying.
Mhm.
So unfortunate. Patients should never be in that position.
Mm,
It's heartbreaking.
mm. Yeah, you really had to advocate for yourself, and thankfully so. But wow, it's just debilitating. And then not maybe they're not purposely gaslighting, but they just didn't understand it. So you had to, thankfully, use your own resources to investigate this for yourself and get into better health. Now, I want to talk about some of these invisible illnesses that you talk about in the nervous system. For
Mhm.
someone listening who feels off but doesn't have a diagnosis, what are some signs that their autonomic nervous system might be dysregulated?
Yes, and so much of my work was there because my autonomic nervous system, that's the nervous system of the body that's automatic, right? Autonomic, it works all by itself. You don't have to make it happen. You don't have to focus on it. It's already in control. It's got that. But when that starts to break down and the symptoms multiply, we do need to focus on it. But a lot of my work was to figure out why. What just happened? Why did that happen? And ultimately came to recognize that certain types of chronic inflammatory states will kick out chemicals, and some of those chemicals interfere with that part of the nervous system. And when they do, the symptoms can be systemic. It's a bigger problem than just one aspect. It tends to go across the board. So a lot of that journey was in figuring out the chemistry of how that was happening, how the nervous system was affected, exactly what we still had to work with, and what could we do to get that going again. Yeah, and I'm happy to say at this point I have 5 patents on this. Ultimately, when I figured this out, I thought, I think this is new. I don't think anybody's ever figured this out before.
Mhm.
Um, so that was very validating getting that. But we have ways now we can correct that problem. But patients are usually inflammatory patients,
Mm.
and they're considered invisible because our ability to measure a lot of those inflammatory chemicals is still in its infancy. So the traditional markers for chronic inflammation like CRP and SED rate is usually fine. We have to go deeper. And once all that is figured out and it's on publications, it's in medical school, et cetera, we won't have these invisible illnesses anymore.
Mhm.
And we'll change the labels, right? Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia,
Yes.
et cetera, is not indicative of what the treatable aspect of that is.
Mhm.
And the patients won't lack the validation they lack today. Yeah. It's just a process.
Yes. And I feel like a lot of people are dealing with some kind of inflammation to some degree, especially the way our foods are, the way our stress levels are. There's inflammation because there's so much crap in our foods and then spraying from the skies and stuff. So everyone's dealing with some kind of inflammation. And I know you talk about inflammaging, which
Yeah.
I think is such a powerful concept. What is actually happening in the body as we age?
Yes. And this is not my word.
Hmm.
When I was looking at inflammation at the time as a patient, I just kind of felt like I was dealing with inflammation, which is a weird feeling, but indeed that's what it was. We can dig into research since research is usually about 15 years ahead of practitioners. So I went into the research to see what is already figured out, what do we know? And how can we take it to the next level? But one thing I came across was as we get older, systemic inflammation gradually increases, and it has to do with the senescence of cells, et cetera. But what we accept, and I don't think we should, Nancy, is that it's a normal part of aging and it leads to these old age illnesses like, tendency to develop heart attacks, strokes, fatigue, digestive problems, et cetera. I don't think we should accept that.
Mm-mm.
I think instead, if we can do everything we can do to address the inflammation, control it, control the autonomic nervous system response to some of those chemicals, that we have a chance of leading a much better life as we get older. I don't think we should accept old age illnesses as just a normal part of aging. So I'm on a personal mission.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proactive with my health because I don't ever want to feel like that again.
No.
And if I can live a great life, high energy level, healthy until the day I die, I'm going to do everything I can do to make that
Mm-hmm. That's quite the mission. That's yes, because you experienced it firsthand
happen.
how not living in alignment with yourself and your body can do, and it's debilitating. Totally. Yeah.
It,
What can you do? I mean, when you're not feeling good, like nothing else matters. Money, things, nothing matters. And I know there's people that are dealing with inflammation right now or these unknown symptoms, and they're going through a lot of what you've gone through about being, not having a diagnosis for these things. What are some things people are doing daily that are quietly increasing inflammation without realizing it?
yes. And this is a little tricky because I want to approach patients like at POTS care. We approach them from the inflammation is increasing, but a lot of that is not your fault. If it's a diet or clean eating or whatever, that's great. But the more inflamed they get, the more sensitive they get. So they can be sensitive to foods, to spices, to things in the air, perfume, to heat, to stress, to any sort of emotional difficulties, trauma, what have you. But when we control the inflammation, their sensitivities improve. So we try to approach patients who are sensitive to things, which I get that because their exposure increases their inflammation. From the inflammatory side, correct as much as we can, get control of that inflammation, and then they can be exposed to things that would increase inflammation and do okay. So I think a lot of your expertise is probably better than mine on what kind of gets inflammation going. Right? We know stress, physical or mental. You were talking about the food, so the additives, et cetera. All of that is important if we want to keep control of our health. But if we're genetically set up where something kicks off the inflammation, like, in my case, it was an illness, it can be trauma, what have you, that inflammation does damage. And then that damage causes more inflammation. And then patients get caught in this cycle and they can do everything they know of to try to control inflammation and they can't get on top of it. So my work is in helping those patients who are set up like I was, like my kids were, where we can't control that response. And rather than spend our lives focusing on avoiding the things that cause inflammation, we focused on controlling the inflammation, and then we can be exposed to the bad food or whatever, and not have the same response. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I do think we all need to do everything we can to maintain our health. But I unfortunately see so many patients who've done everything that we know of to control inflammation, and they're so sick, right?
Mhm.
So there's usually a hang up genetically, and we want to help them with that. I'm so happy to do
Yeah, I know people that are gone to so many doctors and they're hopeful and then it just ends up making them feel worse than they did before.
that.
And I know with inflammation that you've also worked with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS. How
Mhm.
does that connect to the nervous system and inflammation?
Yes. And I can hardly wait to release more information on this. But when I got sick, the doctors at the research hospitals, I asked them, why is it that someone wouldn't recover from this? I don't get it. And they said, well, some patients with EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, don't seem to recover. And they checked me for that. They did skin biopsies. We ended up checking all the blood vessels in my body. Those were fine. And they said, okay, well, your collagen is abnormal. It's a connective tissue problem. It's genetic. So what's happening over time is that the collagen in the blood vessels is weakening. It's getting more lax and blood tends to pool and you're developing POTS. So there's really nothing you can do about that. I said, okay, where are the genetics of this? They said, oh, we don't know that. I go, one, why don't you? And two, if it's a genetic problem with collagen, are we ignoring any genetics that could weaken collagen that could be treatable, like an inflammatory problem? Chronic inflammation affects connective tissue. We know that. Could it be a genetic problem that's inflammatory and you're seeing the results of it? Or could it be both? Could it be that there's a genetic problem with the structure of collagen connective tissue and a problem with inflammatory states where it's worsening that? And they go, yeah, we don't know that. That was another part of the strange journey. So I said, I know it sounds right to you that a gradual laxity of the blood vessels would cause POTS, but there is nothing gradual about this. I got a virus and 2 weeks later, I'm disabled. And then I watched my son, he's 8 years old, get those 3 viruses and just got sicker and sicker. Said it wasn't gradual. It seems to have had a trigger. And I want to try to dig deeper. So part of my research was to look into the collagen inside blood vessels and learn that, okay, well, this isn't right. It's a different type of collagen in the blood vessels. So unless I had something like Marfan's or Lloyd's-Dietz syndrome or what have you, and I didn't, the collagen in the blood vessels shouldn't be affected. Okay. So they were just kind of glossing over some of this, going to a conclusion that was scientifically incorrect. They weren't even thinking deeply about this, and they blamed a genetic issue improperly. So EDS is another condition. We want to change the labels. I have a chapter, the book I put out, gosh, it's been 15 years, it was called The Driscoll Theory, the cause of POTS and EDS. And I'm happy to share that with anyone. But I had a whole chapter on where we went wrong with EDS. We're saying it's a genetic problem of connective tissue without the evidence of that and ignoring any treatable aspect of that condition. So it's another thing we need to change the labels and only say it's a genetic problem when we can locate those genetic issues, right? Because so many patients are told, like I was told, but I didn't believe it, but they do, that, oh, you have a genetic problem, so there's nothing you can do, which is breaking, right?
Very. Yes.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you found there's a bigger picture. People are missing the bigger picture of how these conditions were related, like the nervous system and inflammation,
Yeah.
that they do tie together.
Absolutely. And again, that's the treatable aspect of it, right? So we should always focus for patients on what part of their condition, like you said, is in their control. They should be doing everything they can do to maintain their health. What part of it is out of their control, and throw away these labels that are not based in science. Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot about, well, EDS and autonomic nervous system and dysregulation. And I'm hearing so much about the vagus nerve recently, a lot. It's come up a lot in social media. And I know there's supposed to be a device that stimulates it. There's meditations that can tap into the vagus nerve. How does the vagus nerve actually play into everyday symptoms people wouldn't even connect to?
No, and when I started working on this, no one even knew what the vagus nerve was. This was so beaten path, right? But looking at those list of symptoms, I thought there's so many autonomic. Could this be a problem with the vagus nerve? I was considering compression at the neck, etc. And so I stayed in the science there and went deeper. I thought, okay, it could be, a vagus nerve problem, but I've never had surgery, abdominal surgery. I don't have any reason for it to have been damaged. So is that the right answer, or is it a bigger problem? And I spent a few years sending out symptom checklists to a lot of these invisible illness patients, POTS, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and interestingly, PTSD, someone who goes through some sort of emotional trauma. So usually exhibits autonomic symptoms. And I sent them a checklist with, gosh, I don't know, 140 symptoms, I think it was. And inside of it, I tucked 35 symptoms of anticholinergic syndrome. And that is where the neurotransmitter needed by the parasympathetic nervous system and other systems is declined. And it's usually declined by poisoning, right? We hadn't been poisoned. It felt like we'd been poisoned. But I tuck those symptoms in because if this was a problem with the neurotransmitter getting released, it's not a vagus nerve problem. It's bigger than that. That neurotransmitter is also used by the brain for cognition, short-term memory, and interestingly, and again, brand new, that it's used by the eyes for both tear production and balancing the pupil size. So it became very clear that these patients were affected not by a vagus nerve problem, but by a neurotransmitter problem. The majority of patients showed the majority of symptoms of anticholinergic syndrome. And it would wax and wane, but it was still a very classic pattern. So I tested the receptors of the vagus nerve to see if we had something to work with here. And again, this was something, Nancy, that I thought, why is no one else doing this? Millions of dollars in the research centers focused on looking for some weird autoimmune condition that is shutting down the receptors of the vagus nerve. And so I tested the receptors with nicotine. They work great. This wasn't an autoimmune condition affecting the receptors. So again, one of the patents, we were able to put that in. Nicotine is not a treatment for a vagus nerve problem, but it's a great way of testing the receptors. It's highly inflammatory. You stay on it, causes other problems. But I used those active receptors and then ended up creating, like in my kitchen, using my organic chemistry knowledge, which was 1,000 years old, my new knowledge of genetics, and put together an over-the-counter formulation to trigger those receptors. And I could prove it was working right because the vagus nerve would get stimulated, patients would have a bowel movement, and then their pupil size normalized within too. And that's out there now as Parasymplas. I did a commercial for that, but that changed lives. So we don't need to make our vagus nerves work. It should work by itself. The neurotransmitter is not getting released properly. The sympathetic, that fight or flight system of the body, takes off running. And if you look at patients' pupils, they tend to be bigger. The only thing that affects pupil size, assuming the lighting is the same, is the autonomic nervous system. So in the sympathetic, the fight or flight, way out, ways, the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, the pupils are bigger. And I knew with Parasymplas, we're hitting those receptors properly because the pupils would immediately normalize, or pretty immediately. Yeah. And again, kind of new science. Nobody put all that together, but being an eye doctor probably helped. Yeah. I had some insight that others didn't have.
That is so fascinating. I never thought of it that way at all. You're talking about this research and what you discovered. What excites you most about it?
God, there's so many things. I would say helping patients is like the most rewarding thing ever. In fact, it's pretty rare that I don't end up crying, with somebody, because it was such a horrible journey for me and my family. I don't want to see anyone go through that. But before I exit stage left, my really big goal and what does get me excited is I want to be able to leave the world with the genetics of this, something objective. So these patients are not floundering like we were floundering. That shouldn't be happening to anybody. So to make a difference and kind of come for full circle, being able to take it back to the eyes, which was an amazing thing to happen, is extraordinarily rewarding for me. So I get excited about changing how this is being viewed, diagnosed, and treated. Yeah.
It's really powerful. And what would you say to someone who feels dismissed or unheard of?
Yes.
Nobody's listening to them in their health journey.
So important. Never give up. Something is up. And just because you don't have all of your answers right now and your doctors are floundering, it doesn't mean there isn't an answer. So there were so many dark times with me and my family during those 10 years or so, so many dark times. No one could come to me and say, your son's going to be okay. You're going to get answers. You're going to be healthy again. But I really want patients who are dealing with something. If they don't have their answers, know that there are answers. Don't give up. Yeah.
Mhm.
Give up. Mm.
So, if we were to zoom out for a moment, what does true wellness mean to you now beyond just being symptom free?
Yeah, the recovery of my kids.
Yeah.
Probably the most rewarding thing ever.
I bet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Well, this has been wonderful. I would love for my audience to know how to either work with you, find some of your research, and find your books, if you have a website, you
Yeah.
know.
I'm in a few places. Potscare.com is
Okay.
probably the main one. I set up a Patreon account called Pots Rebels, and I'm putting everything
Cute.
I can find in there. So that's been great. We meet every couple weeks or so, and I can answer questions and offer help and hope for those people. And then Peristim Plus, that gets the autonomic nervous system working, is at vagusnervesupport.com.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. And I will put all that information in the show notes. And I have one last question for you. And it's my signature, my signature question. What does it mean for you to live with an awakened heart?
This illness brought forward so much of the awakened heart issue. In fact, the entire faith journey I was on was flabbergasting. So I would say going through that entire journey, and I'm respectful where anyone is on that journey, but to exit it, keeping the heart open to hope, to love, to accepting whatever other people are going through, etc., was mind changing. Yeah, it absolutely changed me. I think it's very easy to go through a journey like that. And I do see this happen where people exit it with closed hearts, bitter, burned out, mad, etc. And trying to get through that with an awakened heart is really an important part. Yeah,
Beautiful.
very difficult to do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for everything you shared today. You're going to help so many people who feel gaslit or just not understood with what they're going through, their health journey. So thank you so much for helping them along those ways. And I can't wait for people to reach out to you and find your work. And I know we got to go. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.